welcome everyone to another episode of Broken Families, where we host conversations on divorce, parental alienation, and high conflict relationships. My name is Andrew Folkler.
And I'm Barbara Pointe. Today, we are going to discuss trauma in depth, especially in regards to anxiety and depression. And that is why we have brought on a very special guest speaker to help us really dive deep into this important topic. Len McEwen is counselor and a mediator that specializes in trauma recovery, anxiety and depression, and also grief. So without further ado, welcome, Len.
How are Thank you. Just a sec now. Oh, no, that's not funny. Oh. What can I say? I'm so glad to be here.
It's definitely great to have you too.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you can tell me just to cool it, and I'll get serious.
Okay, well, why is trauma a relevant and important conversation to have
today? Well, if you live in Alberta, it's snowing, and that's producing trauma. But it's really producing trauma on all of those people who have been following the COVID guidelines. And I think that that's probably going to be the most relevant form of trauma and the cause of the majority of anxiety and depression that we're going to see for the next number of years. Whenever we go through a major traumatic event, it often takes us between 5 and 10 years to recover psychologically. When we went through the fire in Fort McMurray, we're about 6 or 7 years out now, I think, and we're still dealing with mental health problems out of that community. The same is true of Slave Lake, although they're coming to the end of that term. If I look at my call log, the people who call my office, and I polled it to see what they're asking for, the majority of them are asking for assistance with anxiety and depression. And unfortunately, most of us these days think that what we need is a really rapid fix, when often some of the more natural solutions are not only better for us, but better for the family, better for the community at large, rather than, in many cases, self-medicating or medicating with, one of these miracle drugs that the doctors have given us. Did I answer your question?
You did.
Wow.
Thank you. Okay, Len, why does it take 5 to 10 years to collectively heal from trauma? Like, to me, that seems like a really long time.
I'm not sure. But when the Slave Lake fire occurred, I was driving into Slave Lake while everybody was evacuating, because I was going up to work with the wildfire teams. So I got up there the night of the evacuation. The effect of driving through flames and smoke to get into that community will never leave me. It's burned into my brain. And so if I didn't practice some form of self-care to help myself re-regulate, I'm sure that I would be hypervigilant for a long time, just concerned about every bit of smoke that I see. Let me tell you a story. I was driving into Slave Lake about a year ago, and off on the left side of the road, there was a smoke plume. Well, Slave Lake, I worked the Slave Lake fire too. And that smoke plume was right in an area that was burning when Slave Lake burned. And you can imagine what that did to me. My complete response was threat, trauma, heart rate up, blood pressure through the roof, just ready to fight, flight, or freeze. That was 7 years later. So, one of the things that, because the family is a part of the title of this program, one of the things that is pretty important is that the whole area of developmental trauma, what happens to young kids, often stays with them for the rest of their lives. And that cat's going to eat you. He's going to grab you by the ear and throw you on the ground.
That's the beauty of live streaming.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I should tell you that my office is in a church that has been decommissioned. And the church, so I have an office in the church, but the church has got, you know, the usual gymnasiums and sanctuaries and all the rest of it. And it's got a very big commercial kitchen. And today, there's a restaurant that has rented the kitchen to sell hamburgers out the front door because we can't eat in the restaurants these days. So every once in a while, you'll hear bang as the front door shuts. But then, because this is a church, now here's where the trauma comes in. We have to have 2 cats to control the mice. And those mice are traumatized. I spend half my day working with traumatically affected mice. No, I don't. Okay, what's the next question?
So, all right. So you sort of referenced collective trauma.
Yep.
In Slave Lake, which is where I grew up as a kid in the summers. And you've referenced COVID. And maybe we could narrow in a little bit on trauma in the family, especially as related to children, because you said it changes them forever.
Well, it doesn't change them forever. It has the potential of doing that. It depends on whether or not mom and dad recognize what has happened and support the child in seeking appropriate support or assistance or therapy. You're talking in many cases, in most cases, developmental trauma. And we're really talking about attachment, etc. You know, years ago, I taught parenting after separation. And there was one component of that that was really important, and that was, you know, don't yell at your kids. Don't yell at your partner because it's traumatizing. And over the years, I'm sure I've seen lots of kids who have been traumatized just by the emotional level that is maintained in the household. So, you know, if you want to avoid bills for therapy, just keep your emotions down, keep your house at a nice, calm level, and you're going to avoid most of this. Make sure you demonstrate affection for your child. Remember that bonding is really, really important. And so the whole concept of holding the child heart against heart is really quite important. If that's an area that concerns you, or that any of the viewers, listeners are interested in, the best reference book out there right now is probably Neurofeedback and Developmental Trauma by Seaburn Fisher. It's a marvelous book. And if you're dealing with trauma, you also already know about Bessel van der Kolk. And so Bessel van der Kolk, the last video I saw, the last video for the required video for training was Bessel van der Kolk being introduced by Seaburn Fisher. A lot of these videos are now on YouTube. I'm trying to think if that one is. I'm not sure. But there's some really good resources there. There's also some real crap. So I'm glad you're doing this. Bessel van der Kolk is a good name. Seaburn Fisher is a good name. And those people, I really trust their resources.
Absolutely.
Those are great resources. I also like Peter Levine's work.
Yep. I do a lot of work with neurofeedback. You know what neurofeedback is, right? Brainwave biofeedback.
Right.
The reason I do work with neurofeedback is because it works. And if you listen to Bessel van der Kolk, he does a little piece at the end of one of his videos. Somebody asks him why they don't use, or why doesn't he use CBT? I think that's the question. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah. And he says, it doesn't work. And then he goes and he shows, sorry?
It takes a long time as well, correct?
It doesn't work.
Okay.
Period. It doesn't work. And he shows you the results of a meta-analysis of the effectiveness, the efficacy of CBT for trauma. And CBT takes the traumatic symptom, the graph of traumatic symptoms down, but it never takes it below the clinical level. And then it goes back up again. 6 months later, they're almost as bad as they were when they came for therapy.
Fascinating, really.
For context, for the average listener who is not psychological enthusiasts like us,
right?
Could we have a brief definition on neurofeedback, and even in contrast to CBT as well?
Well, so CBT is talk therapy. And CBT, there are very few practitioners that practice pure CBT. It's just too tedious, I think. And most people practice sort of an eclectic talk therapy. Neurofeedback is totally different. Neurofeedback is where you do a brain map to find out how the brain is functioning under each of a number of sites on the scalp. So in my case, it depends on what I'm doing. I usually up around 20 sites. And what I'm looking for is what's the relative and absolute power there? So how much electricity is the brain producing as it thinks, or as it thinks or controls or whatever? And then how is that particular site talking to another site on the brain? Now, it could be talking too fast or too slow. It could be talking in a very complex fashion, or it could be talking in a very simple fashion. It could have an amplitude that is out of balance with the other site. All of those complicate the performance of the individual. And so what we have to do is we have to identify where are the areas that are producing those types of anomalies, and then design a training program that teaches the brain to behave in a more normal fashion. And so it becomes a matter of operant conditioning. We show the person a picture and we pair it with sounds, and when his brain is doing what more closely resembles a normal performance, the picture moves, or the person hears a tone or something like that that produces a reward. And this is extremely effective. You know, these days, we still have lots of kids that go in for attention deficit disorder and are given stimulants, Ritalin, etc. 85% of kids with attention deficit disorder can be effectively trained using neurofeedback so they don't display symptoms. And there's no medication.
Wow.
85%. And yet, this hasn't been approved by the government. It's not a part of many health programs. And it's expensive because it does take a commitment on behalf of the parents. Now, that's for attention deficit disorder. The same thing is true for trauma. I work with a number of people who are traumatized by industrial accidents or by service in the military or as first responders. All of those people, if they're coming for neurofeedback, unless they have a really good plan, are paying out of pocket. And so that's the downside. The upside, you do neurofeedback, generally increase your IQ from 9 to 20 points, and it improves your memory. If you happen to play a musical instrument, it'll advance you about 1 conservatory grade, so 1 year of study, just by using neurofeedback. That's how powerful it is.
That's significant.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely huge because of the amount of money it saves, the absolute amount of pain that it saves for the individuals. You know, if you're dealing with night terrors where every night you wake up screaming because of an event that you went through, and I can relieve that, that's pretty significant.
How about for a woman, Len, that never feels safe or typically doesn't feel safe in her own body because she's had some form of domestic abuse or intimate partner abuse?
Same thing. You know, if you can teach the woman to self-regulate on demand, then that becomes under her control, where the trauma has taken it away from her. It has placed it under, well, it's still under her control, but it's the body trying to preserve itself. You know, if you've been abused, well, here's the example. I think Bessel van der Kolk uses this one. You're walking down a path and you see an object on the ground, looks like a snake. And so all of a sudden your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up and all the rest of it. And when you get up to it, it's just a stick. But what do you remember, the stick or the snake? You remember the snake. So if you've been hit every time you've said no to your partner, you learn pretty quickly not to say no. And what you've got to do is now take that and put it under your control. And in putting it under your control, you have to learn how to self-regulate. Unfortunately, we don't teach self-regulation.
We don't at all. Like the concept of down-regulating your nervous system or self-regulating your nervous system is really not common language.
No, not at all. That's why I don't have it here, do I? Where is it? Now I don't know where it is right now, but I have a recording that I made of bells. And they are timed to 5-second intervals. So it goes ding, 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 like that, 20 minutes. If you breathe in on the first bell and breathe out on the second, for about 80% of the population, you are breathing at your resonant frequency, the frequency at which your heart rate and your respiration rate come into synchronization. It has a pronounced effect on the baroreceptors on your heart, which control heart rate and blood pressure. So heart rate goes down, blood pressure goes down, and a message gets sent through the rest of the body that says, even in these times of pain and chaos, you'll be okay. And you get a feeling of relaxation, and all of the brain chatter that you have about how unsafe you are, etc., disappears.
So would brain chatter, I'm just curious, be like a monkey mind or like a limbic loop where you're just like repeating, right? Okay.
Busy brain. And so, you know, if you're going to self-regulate, you got to get rid of as much of that stuff as you can that's drawing your attention. What's the first thing that I do with first responders or ex-military? Teach them to breathe. There's a book out by Nestor. It's called Breathe. Everybody should read it. We should read it to our kids in bed. That's how important it is. There's another one out by Seaburn Fisher. No, not Seaburn Fisher. Laura Lagos. same sort of thing, only this one is aimed specifically at elite performers, athletes, artists, business people, because of the huge impact it has on performance. So what my model, my way of thinking about trauma goes is really straightforward. You know, when you are traumatized and your behavior changes, you know, that's really a good thing because it saved you, or it's in the process of saving you. But now that the danger has passed, you've got to teach yourself how to live without responding to every stick on the ground. And that becomes lessons in self-regulation. And so you use things like heart rate variability. You use the basic 4: diet, exercise, drink water, take cod liver oil. Those are really important things if you're going to come out of this.
Wow.
So, I mean, here's the question. What's the most effective method of dealing with depression? Any idea? Straightforward answer.
Sex?
Exercise. Exercise.
Exercise. Wow.
Exercise. My father was a doctor in Calgary for 55 plus years. If you walked into his office and said, "Oh, doctor, I'm so depressed," he'd write you a prescription for a new pair of running shoes.
It's a good doctor.
That's right. He ran 7 miles a day, almost every day until he was about 80. And so when you look at how much trauma a doctor carries with him, and he didn't have any of those symptoms, he was doing something right. I've got to tell you, I deal with trauma on a daily basis. I deal with vivid trauma on a monthly basis. Compassion fatigue is something I have to be really careful of, because just by hearing the story, I can traumatize myself. One of the things that often happens in families is we tell the family story and we traumatize our kids as a result of it.
Yeah, that's true.
So when we talk about trauma, we have to be really careful. What are we talking about? Developmental trauma? Trauma as a result of bullying or abuse? I mean, really, what's the definition of trauma? The definition of trauma is being helpless when faced with a situation that has taken a life or may take a life. Well, if you're a 6-year-old kid, you don't know what's going to take a life. All you know is that it's dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you defined trauma. That was good, just to get that definition of it, of what trauma is.
That's a pretty standard sort of definition. So these have been great questions so far. I've gone off topic each time. What now?
Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking of is kind of circling back to one of the points you were making when you were talking about neurofeedback.
Yep.
Was what are some of the patterns you notice in terms of people who are dealing with anxiety, and maybe even in terms of how people are dealing with depression?
Well, you know, I mean, we could go through a symptom list, but I don't think that would help, because the likelihood of people having an EEG machine in their office or in their home is pretty slim. Although, boy, this is going to become a commercial. Are you aware of a device called a Muse, M-U-S-E?
That I'm not, no.
Come on. The Muse, do I have one here? No, I don't. A Muse is a device that fits across your forehead and behind your ears. It has sensors here on your forehead and behind your ears, and reads your brain waves and plays them back, or plays back a sound depending on how your brain is performing to your cell phone.
Really?
Yes. And you too can have one of these for a mere $250 by going to Chapters, Best Buy, or buying online, Amazon.
Wow. Well, isn't that neurofeedback in a way?
It is neurofeedback. That's exactly what it is. Only you don't have control or knowledge to help you. This is sort of a one device fits all. Whereas if you come and see me, I have 21 sites, and I'm going to make sure that we do the right thing at the right site. Okay. But I've got to tell you, I have vets that are using the Muse on a daily basis. I have worked with and learned from firefighters in British Columbia who have the Muse as a part of the equipment within the fire hall. Other devices that are out there that are equally as important are the heart rate variability trainers that are out there now. There's a number of them. If you read Laura Lagos's book, she has one that she particularly promotes. I've used it. It's a good unit. But those sorts of things, let me tell you a story. Is it story time?
Story time.
It's got to be story time. I worked in a school a number of years ago where a young man had, this was in rural Alberta, had taken Dad's rifle out to do some quotes, hunting quotes, and through a series of events, shot and killed his brother. Trauma, not only for the little boy, but also for the teachers and the support staff and the students that this young man dealt with on a daily basis. And I was asked to go in and work with the school. And when I walked in, I found that the teachers were probably more traumatized than anyone. And so we began doing heart rate variability training with the teachers, and then moved to doing heart rate variability training with the kids. And then we added in some of the other, magic ones: diet, exercise, drink water, take cod liver oil. And so diet, well, they had a lunch program. Exercise, they didn't really have a gym or anything like that. So they started dancing. And so they would come in the morning and they do their heart rate variability training and they dance, or they do yoga. And that brought self-regulation back to the majority of the students. As a result of that, when I worked up at the Fort McMurray Fire, I advocated for the use of heart rate variability monitors within the schools. And the government of Alberta bought 200 units and put them in the schools, and then started a program where they started training trainers so that they could go out into the general community and teach individuals how to self-regulate. They did that in Calgary after the floods. This is now, I think, an important component of any form of trauma relief. And yet nobody knows about it. This is a medical concept, and I work with nurses and sometimes doctors, and they don't know about it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but is this similar to heart math?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
Okay, but heart math has got some wonderful qualities about it. They have a research team that does absolutely amazing things. But if you really want to get into it, read Nestor's book, and he will give you background and suggest opportunity to you that is going to be profound, have an influence on your life that is going to last with you the rest of your days. I'll tell you, I've got an individual right now that comes to see me. He read Nestor's book, and we'd been doing what I call the bells. That's heart rate variability training, but it's using my recording. So he'd been doing the bells for about 6 months, liked it, got huge benefit from it, read Nestor's book, and Nestor says, okay, so breathing at pace is pretty important, but try this. Try only breathing through your nose, because man was not made to breathe through his mouth. And second, when you go to sleep at night, tape your mouth shut just so you breathe through your nose.
Oh, wow.
Now that's pretty scary. The impact on this young man was unbelievable.
Really?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
So this is, what are we talking about? Stuff that if I was, what would I say, 1900 years old, some yogi might have taught me in India. This isn't new. This is all old stuff. But we're rediscovering it. And as we rediscover it, it's becoming more and more important to us because it has a better effect than in many cases than a lot of medications, etc.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, because trauma is a fact of life. And it seems to me many of us are seeking relief from trauma. But it's almost like, how do you do
it?
Relief, as if it's an esoteric topic.
So if you came to see me, I'm going to give away all my secrets. Anybody who is potentially going to come and see me as a client, don't listen to this. Okay, now I'll tell you. If you're going to come and see me, the first thing I'm going to teach you is heart rate variability training. Then I'm going to assess you for diet, exercise, drink water, take cod liver oil, especially the cod liver oil part. Then we're going to work out a program for you so that you can do heart rate variability training at least 20 minutes a day, usually in the morning. If you're going to be a professional athlete, Leah Lagos says it should be 40 minutes a day. And so you move from there. If you want to take a look at, from there we do neurofeedback. I do an assessment and then we do neurofeedback. But if you want to take a look at who believes in this heart rate variability training, for instance, search YouTube for Neurofeedback Vancouver Olympics. The first thing that they teach in this video is heart rate variability training. The second thing is neurofeedback.
So, and all of this can be done with children.
Yeah.
And so do you think there's merit in a mother or a parent figure doing neurofeedback and regulating her nervous system, and then that will then tumble down to her daughter or her child?
Yes. Does
their brains sync up, I guess is where I'm going.
Sorry?
Do their brains sync up?
No, but they're attached. And so if mom is all of a sudden calm and the child is old enough to see what's going on, kids are great sponges, SpongeBob SquarePants just sucks everything up. So they will be mimicking mom, or they will be mimicking dad. And if dad's wandering around the house yelling at everything and kicking and all the rest of it, that's what he's going to do. But if mom and dad are around the house and they're doing their breathing and they're watching their diets and they're doing all of that good stuff, what's the kid going to do? If the kid is attached to them, he's going to do that.
Right.
Absolutely. I think that would also help in high conflict divorces as well, considering if as a parent you're self-regulating and not letting yourself be worked up too much.
You don't want to get sucked in.
Mm-hmm.
My wife deals with high conflict divorces all the time. Do you know how much the average divorce costs in Alberta right now if you go to court?
I'd love to know. I only know.
About 30,000. That's just legal fees and court fees. So now, if you want to get something out of your ex, boy, I hope he's rich, because he's just paid a chunk of money, or you've just paid a chunk of money, and either one or both of you are living in poverty with your family.
That's a sobering reality that most
Yes.
people don't realize before they begin divorce, that could happen to them.
That's right. Not only could it happen, it is likely to happen. Majority of in the majority of divorce cases right now, people are self-representing in front of court because they can't afford legal fees. In Calgary, there is a social worker and a lawyer who have come together to try and teach people how to self-represent themselves in front of the courts, simply because they want to stop some of the bleeding that's going on.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is a huge area if you want to talk of trauma and kids.
We do.
Yeah. So I think that's an important topic, but it's not a money topic, because I'm not sure that parents are really predisposed to spending money on children.
How do you mean?
Well, if you walk into my office and say, I've got a kid who has severe attention deficit disorder, and I do an assessment and it comes back and it's true, the kid has severe attention deficit disorder, and I say, well, you really have two choices here. You can go and see a doctor and he'll put him on a medication cocktail, or you can do neurofeedback. If you're going to do neurofeedback, it's probably going to take between 20 and 40 sessions and cost you someplace between $3,000 and $6,000. What are they going to do?
Pump them with Ritalin. It's usually what they do, because they want a silver bullet. Sounds like there's also a bit of gatekeeping from like insurance and the pharmaceutical industry as well.
Absolutely. But those of us who do neurofeedback, or many of us, belong to an organization called the International Society for Neuromodulation and Research. And that organization has produced a white paper that summarizes the research in neurofeedback for insurance companies. And more we're starting to see them being willing to pay. Because once you do neurofeedback, for instance, it's done. You don't ever go back. There is no refill. It's like heart rate variability training. Once you do that, your body adjusts to it. And yet we don't do that.
Exactly. So earlier you had
This isn't as straightforward as you thought it was going to be, is it?
Never is, though.
We're down the rabbit hole with you, Len.
Uh-oh. Speaking of that, as I look out my window, there are 4 rabbits on our front lawn.
Really?
Absolutely.
Well, there's no coincidences in this non-coincidental universe.
That's right.
So I'm gathering that trauma is a fact of life, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence. And earlier you had mentioned children that may have developmental trauma. And how might a mom or dad know if their child was traumatized through a high conflict divorce or otherwise?
They probably know. They probably don't want to admit it, but the child's behavior will give it away.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Okay, so, the usual sorts of things: anger, lack of concentration, poor memory, stuff like that.
So I imagine that first step for a parent that does want to take action would be to admit that they screwed up somewhere along the line and take responsibility for it. What would a parent do next then?
Well, it depends on where they live. And, I hate to say this, and who's offering what services.
Mm-hmm.
If they live in rural Alberta, they're hooped. they really have got to probably wait until a summer period or something like that when the kids are out of school and they can come into the city and work with somebody who does neurofeedback. If not, then they should go and make use of medication. Although my experience is a lot of the kids will quit taking the meds. If they have a neurofeedback practitioner in the community, I'd make sure that that practitioner at least is a member of ISNR, International Society for Neuromodulation and Research. And there are a number of designations that one can get for various types of neurofeedback, etc. Those are nice, but I think that the important thing is that you be connected to a group like ISNR, and they should insist on that. They should also, by the way, insist that the practitioner that they go to be a registered healthcare professional, because I have found more and more that massage parlors and places like that are picking up inexpensive neurofeedback equipment, not knowing what they're doing with it, charging people a great deal of money and producing no results. So, you know, I say that I had a woman come and see me and say, you know, what's neurofeedback? And so I said, well, here, I'll show you. I showed her a little video clip and stuff like that. And she said, well, I went and saw so-and-so because I needed neurofeedback, and I was never assessed. Nobody ever put any leads on my scalp. I never saw anything that I was supposed to respond to. And I got 3 sessions for $1,000. So when I heard that, I just about flipped out. But, you know, it's like the computer business. Remember, no, you're too young to remember this. When microcomputers came out, everybody was a computer expert. And there are lots of businesses that really suffered because they had some Yahoo sell them a computer that didn't work for their business. So neurofeedback has been around since the mid-1950s. I've been associated with it one way or another since 1996. So that's a chunk of professional time.
So I'm just curious, would neurofeedback work on any brain?
I don't know. I could turn your head sideways. Let me look in your ear.
There's some space
no,
there.
I think we found the first one it won't work on.
I wouldn't doubt it.
No, you know, it'll work on any brain. If you got Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or something, you know, the effect may not be exactly what you had hoped for, but it'll still you know, for senior citizens, it's called brain brightening. And there's a bunch of literature on how it affects senior citizens.
Is it opening up new neural pathways?
Well, I guess that's one way of looking at it. Neuroplasticity is what we're talking about. But, you know, you're asking, you know, what is it used for? Well, I have an 80% success rate with addictions. 80. The average success rate in residential settings is 7%.
That's phenomenal.
Right.
Wow.
So I have a really good track record with autism. It's not that I make the person normal, but I get rid of a bunch of the behaviors that detract from that person having a happy life. We're talking quality of life. The same is true of people with Down syndrome, stuff like that. There's more and more of that literature that is coming out. The problem that we have is there's not enough money to pay for it. If you've got a Down syndrome kid or an autistic kid, and you have coped with him, unless you're very fortunate and your partner makes a lot of money, you're probably just about burnt out and you've put almost every nickel you have into the care of your kid anyway. And that's a part of the heartbreak that I face every day.
That is heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So that was a good question. Did I answer it? I can't remember.
I think we did.
Would you like to pose any of your own questions with respect to trauma, especially for families that are traumatized in the court system?
Don't go to court. You know, I mean, if you're seriously going to break up with your partner, sit down with your partner and write out an agreement between the two of you. And the only time you see a lawyer is to say, have I done something here that is right out in left field? Shouldn't do it. And if he says, no, but this isn't in your best interest and that isn't in your best interest, you have to recognize that you negotiated the agreement. And so there are bound to be things that aren't in your best interest that you gave up to get other things that you wanted more. And then take that from the lawyers to the court and ask for a divorce. Don't fight about time with the kids. Time with the kids, I mean, under Alberta law, and I think this is true in most provinces now, both parents have to be involved in the parenting plans for their kids. Both parents have to be involved in providing financially for the kids. So, you know, fighting about how much time you've got with the kids is sort of pointless. Besides that, I can tell you from better experience that 12 years after they leave you, they'll phone up and ask you what happened. And you want to be able to say, I did my best to keep the family together or to provide as well as I could for you, making sure that you and my other children were okay. You don't want to say, oh, that SOB, my ex-partner, you know, because that just prolongs the traumatic response.
It makes sense. I mean, in reference to one of the topics Barbara and I talk about a lot is something known as parental alienation. And one of the more common things that is spoken about is once the kid is of age, there's a certain wait period before some of them make a trip back. And in many cases, it really does depend on how that estranged parent reacts when to that initial meetup, considering that sometimes if they stick to their more unregulated emotional ways, then the child starts to say, well, it was nice talking, I'm going to get out of here. And obviously the more regulated parents are able to start reestablishing that relationship.
Yep. And you know, I think the other thing that's really important too is that a part of the parent's job is to provide the child with a set of values and behaviors that are appropriate for a child, not appropriate for an adult. And so you got to teach your kid that it's all right to go and play. These days, kids don't play. They don't go outside and interact with others. It's one of the things that really distresses me. We've got helicopter parents all over the place. And the helicopter parent isn't developing the child to be the best that they can be.
That's true. That's true.
Absolutely. See it every day. Poor kid comes in, sits down with me, and it's the first time he's had a break from his parents. When I was a kid, I used to get up in the morning, pull on my pants, have a piece of toast, and I was gone until dinner time or until the city turned on the street lights. These days, if the child isn't within 15 feet of the parent, there's a problem.
No, that's very true, actually. Very true.
Right? And if
Yeah.
you take a look at it, most of the parents say, oh, I'm afraid that my daughter will be picked up and raped. And if you look at the statistics, the likelihood of that happening, I think, are less than the likelihood that your child will get COVID.
Yeah, I think there's more online dangers actually than actual physical dangers, like when
Oh,
you
now you've opened the can of worms. Here's what every parent should do.
tell us.
Should
Right?
take the television and boot it out the front door. Take all of the laptops and tablets and cell phones and put them in a locked box except for 1 hour a day.
That's very radical for most people to hear, I would
No.
guess.
Oh, for people to hear, but if you take a look at some of the intellectual leaders in the world, Bill Gates, that's how his family works. What's the guy on Facebook?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg, that's how his family behaves.
Really?
Absolutely. You go take a look at some of the historical documents in video on CNN and see what digital addiction is doing to our kids. It's pretty awful.
Well, and then in context, I imagine it provides a great deal of escapism from whatever ails them at the moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just like taking heroin. Yeah, it tickles all the pleasure centers.
Oh my gosh.
And so, you know, I mean, one of the things that I think is really unfortunate is that kids don't come with owner's manuals. There was a guy by the name of Ray Verge, who was a civil servant in the government of Alberta. He worked in culture, youth, and recreation, and he proposed developing a passport for children as they turned into adulthood to fill in all the gaps that parents most often miss. And the passport would have not only information in it, but it would have coupons so that they could go bowling, or they could go, I don't know, pick a sport, any sport. They could go and see an opera, stuff that kids don't do these days.
Even more so right now, and in the times we're living in of COVID.
Absolutely. But, you know, you take a look at the struggling artists. I mean, the ESO, the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, puts out a newsletter every Friday trying to attract me to some of their things. I think they're brilliant. I think they're brilliant. We need them to be doing that. Unfortunately, I haven't been in a position where I had time to involve myself in some of their opportunities.
Absolutely.
You ask about what do we do for self-regulation? Well, one of the things that we do for self-regulation is music. But what kind of music do we listen to these days?
So it's a wide variety, wide myriad, depending on.
Well, there isn't a whole lot of nice, calm, quiet church music, right? Why is that important? Well, it's important because it helps us regulate ourselves. You asked for what's my one of my quick fixes for anxiety. It's a piece of music sung by either the Tallis Scholars or the 16 called Miserere by Allegre, right? Beautiful, 12 minutes long. Sorry?
Absolutely. And the high C that Mendelssohn put in there is fantastic. It's a wonderful work of art.
Piece of music. It's 12 minutes long. You get to sit back with all the lights dimmed down, a candle burning in front of you, a glass of red wine, and some liverwurst on crackers.
Yeah. And the story is always fascinating to me.
Absolutely.
For context, Mozart was given the rare opportunity, I think it was to enter in and hear the piece, but he was not allowed to notate it because the church deemed it not fit for public hears.
Yep.
And Mozart listened to it once. I think he was a single digit.
He had a
It was like,
photographic memory for music,
yeah,
and he just wrote it down.
he was really young. I mean, still into single digits, and he transcribed the entire piece. And then later, Mendelssohn was, I think, was working on it, and he made a few adjustments or a few mistakes or something like that, and that's where the high C came in.
And now there has been an original manuscript of it found, and the 16 are singing the original.
Mm-hmm.
And it is equally as lovely. But I had a fellow come and see me once. He was so anxious. He was just right beside himself. And so I did a bit of hypnosis with him, and I thought it worked fairly well. And he came back and he says, "Oh, I'm going nuts." And I said, "Okay." And I gave him my copy of the 16 singing Miserere. And you know what Miserere translates to? My sin, my terrible sin.
Yeah.
Right? It's the 51st Psalm. Well, his anxiety was because he was in modern moral eyes a bit of a sinner. Anyway, I gave it to him and I said, "Listen to this." He came back about 6 months later and he said, "Well, I got a bone to pick with you, McEwen." I said, "Why?" And he says, "Because I have now worn out 3 CDs of Miserere and my staff won't talk to me because I play it constantly in the office."
Wow.
Right? Those sorts of things bring the emotional level down to a place where we can cope. So now I'm going to have to get royalties from whoever produces CDs, Heart Math, Muse, what else?
You mentioned one to me when we were talking once. It was called the Calm app.
Oh, there's a Calm app. Yeah. There's lots of those. But you have to really watch them because some of them are based on false premises. Calm is supposed to be really good. I don't use it. I use what I've created because I've created it for a special purpose, period. Calm is a generic thing. Really nice stuff, but not for me. In my practice, I want them to use what I call the bells. And the reason I want them to use the bells is because I know what the effect of the bells are.
Great. Very nice. Any other pearls of wisdom you'd like to share with us with respect to trauma before we bring this conversation to a close?
What do you mean we're finished?
we
We can't be finished.
have you on again. We're
Oh,
finished.
Yeah, we
no.
definitely have to bring you on board.
Words of wisdom. Yeah, don't put it off. Do it. You have to remember Coué's law. Coué's law goes like this. In a contest between willpower and imagination, imagination always wins. You cannot will yourself to do something you can't imagine yourself doing. So if you're in a situation where everything is emotionally emotive, start listening to Miserere and imagining yourself not in that position so that your body will begin to emanate behavior that is not emotionally emotive. So what does that mean to you? Well, one of the great philosophers of our time, Yoda, what's his favorite expression?
There is no try.
There is no try. There is only do. Why? Because as soon as you say try, you give your brain an excuse for failure, right? So you have to do. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to try and do my math. Guess what? You don't care about your math. So the brain can't tell the difference between reality and imagination. Whether you believe it or not, if you say something to the brain, it will take it as truth. So Coué got a group of students together split them in two groups. The experimental group and the control group were matched for athletics, academics, and social ability, those three things. Controls went off and they did whatever controls do. And the experimentally had to do one thing 20 times a day. At the end of the experimental period, which I think was 60 days, brought them back together and reassessed each of them. The experimental group beat the control group in every measure that he tried. Now, for $20, I'll tell you what he told them. No, I'll just tell you. Jeez. He told them to say to themselves, every day and in every way, I'm getting better and better. That's it. Say that to yourself 20 times a day. The brain doesn't have to believe it. You just have to say it. So here's the final nugget, right? Everybody is interested in losing weight and being fit. So this university, I can't remember which one it is, designed an experiment to strengthen the weakest muscle on the body, which is your little finger. And they designed an apparatus where they put a pipe here and a glove for the rest of the hand. So you put your hand in the glove and then you strengthen that finger against the pipe for half an hour a day. So again, two groups, experimental and control. They measured them both before and they measured them after. So they've done this now. The experimental had the pipe. The control group just thought about doing it. Didn't do it, just thought about it. At the end of the experimental period, the experimental group increased the strength of that muscle. I think it was 35 or 38%. Pretty good. The control group, who just thought about it, didn't do it, just thought about it, increased their strength 18%. So, do you realize what that means to the fitness industry? I'm going to open fitness centers that have nothing but lazy boy chairs.
Well, it always amazed me when I used to work out and my trainer would help me to lift a weight. But after I lifted it, she'd said I wasn't even touching the bar. But just the thought of her touching the bar would allow me to power up and lift it.
Mm-hmm. There are lots of experiments like that. We don't make use of any of that. You know, if you're going to be an Olympic athlete, one of the things that they teach you is visualization. My COVID project is to learn how to play the banjo. So I hear in my mind the tunes that I'm trying to play, right? All of that is helpful to us. How much of that do any of us do? Not very much. All right, just a sec now. Well, I don't have a pocket, so I'm out of nuggets.
That means you'll have to come back on another day, Len.
Well, I don't know. This has been so taxing. I wonder how many lies I told you.
Okay.
All righty, Len, if people wanted to contact you or reach out to you, what would be the best way to do so?
Well, I have 3 websites. They could go to any one of the 3 websites. One of them is bereavementsupport.net. One of them is Highlander Counseling and Mediation. And one of them is Trauma Alberta. Ooh. And my email address is on all of those sites. Just send me an email.
Right on. All right, Ag.
And if they're really nice, if they say wonderful things about me and how they really enjoyed this interview, I'll send them a copy of the bells, and I'll throw in a copy of trauma-informed yoga that was developed for the firefighters in British Columbia.
Nice.
What a bonus.
Yeah.
I would personally love either of those bonuses. So that is incredible.
Send me your emails.
Awesome. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Alrighty, everyone. And that is all we have time for today. Once again, thank you for taking the time to be with us. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channel either on YouTube or through our podcast through the various podcast streams. Don't forget, we include a downloadable document below summarizing all the golden nuggets that Len has shared with us today for your loved ones to help you deal with these challenges of trauma, anxiety, depression. Barbara, if listeners wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do so?
Barbara at barbaralapointe.com. My email?
Alrighty. If you want to reach me,
This has been wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you want to reach me, you can email me at startnow@andrewfolkler.com. As always, thank you for taking the time to be with us at the Broken Families podcast, where we discuss, help you find solutions to divorce, parental alienation, and high conflict relationships. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Mhm.